The Galaxy in Crisis, 5 to 7 minute hook. The galaxy was on the brink of disaster. For centuries, the galaxy had enjoyed a delicate peace, with various species coexisting and working together in harmony. But that peace had been shattered. Wars, famine, and natural disasters had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire, leaving entire civilizations on the verge of collapse. There were whispers of a new, unknown enemy, something far more dangerous than any war or natural disaster. It had started small, like a shadow in the distance, but over time it grew. Star systems, once thriving with life and trade, now lay in ruins. Entire planets had gone silent, their populations wiped out by a mysterious force that no one could understand or fight against. It all began in the distant quadrant of the galaxy, where one small planet sent out a desperate SOS. This planet, once a beacon of peace, was now a ghost town. The inhabitants had tried everything. They fought. They pleaded. They even sent messages to their allies. But no one had responded. Their signal had gone unheard, or worse, ignored. But then, something happened. The planet's SOS, a faint cry for help that barely reached anyone, was caught by a long-range sensor. It wasn't from one of the smaller civilizations that had fallen to ruin. It wasn't from an ally, desperate for help. No, this signal was detected by an entirely different force, the Deathworlders. The Deathworlders were a race known for their brutal strength, relentless drive, and fierce independence. Their reputation had spread throughout the galaxy long before this moment, and not for reasons of diplomacy or peace. Deathworlders were feared. They were a species that lived on a planet where survival was a daily challenge. They were born into a hostile environment, forced to fight every day just to stay alive. They had survived threats that would have wiped out any other species, and they had become the galaxy's most feared warriors. But what no one knew was that the Deathworlders weren't just merciless killers. They were also survivors. And in this moment of crisis, when the galaxy's light was fading, they had a choice to make. The Deathworlder fleet, massive and powerful, was stationed at the far edge of the galaxy, hidden from view. These ships were not just designed for war. They were designed to protect. They were built for survival, for the day when the galaxy would need them most. And that day had come. When the signal was received, the Deathworlders didn't hesitate. They didn't argue over the morality of helping the alien species. They didn't worry about the consequences. They simply acted. The fleet, with its thousands of ships, each carrying the might of the Deathworlders, immediately began to mobilize. The response was fast, precise, and unyielding. The Deathworlders had no time to waste. The galaxy's fate rested on their shoulders. But their mission was not an easy one. The unknown enemy they were about to face was unlike anything they had ever encountered before, and the aliens who had sent the SOS, desperate for salvation, could only watch in awe as the Deathworlder fleet moved toward them. From their position on the edge of the galaxy, the Deathworlders' arrival was a beacon of hope. But for many, it was also a sign of fear. They had heard the stories, how the Deathworlders were ruthless in battle, unrelenting in their pursuit of victory. To some, their arrival meant the end of hope. They feared that the Deathworlders would destroy their enemies with the same cold precision they had used in their own battles. But to others, it was a sign of salvation. The Deathworlders had come, and with them, perhaps the galaxy's last chance at survival. As the fleet grew closer, the people on the planet that had first sent the SOS could only pray. They had no idea what to expect, only that the Deathworlders had come to help or to conquer. But the fleet, with its dark, towering ships and weapons unlike anything they had ever seen, was about to change the course of history. The galaxy was in crisis, and the Deathworlders were the only hope. But the question remained, would they save the galaxy, or would they destroy it all? The fleet mobilizes, a force like no other. The moment the Deathworlders received the distress signal, their fleet sprang to life. The ships, massive behemoths of war, were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Each one was a testament to the brutal efficiency and power of the Deathworlder species. They weren't just ships, they were moving fortresses, capable of withstanding forces that would annihilate most other vessels. The fleet's commander, a seasoned Deathworlder named Raikor, stood on the bridge of the lead ship, his eyes scanning the holographic displays that filled the room. The data was grim. No one knew exactly what they were about to face. All they had was a faint SOS from an alien world, a plea for help, and a promise that the Deathworlders would answer. Raikor's mind was sharp, calculating. He had led his people into many battles before, but this one felt different. The enemy was unknown, and that uncertainty was unsettling. Still, he trusted in his fleet. He trusted in his warriors. The Deathworlders had faced impossible odds before, and they had always emerged victorious. They were a species forged in the fires of their harsh homeworld, and they knew no other way but to fight and survive. "Prepare for hyperspace jump," Raikor commanded, his voice calm and steady. The crew sprang into action, their movements swift and synchronized. It was a testament to the years of training, the unspoken bond between the Deathworlders. In mere moments, the fleet's engines roared to life, and the ships vanished into hyperspace. Across the galaxy, the planet that had sent the SOS was bracing for the arrival of this mysterious fleet. The alien species, a race of peaceful beings who had long relied on diplomacy, had never experienced anything like this. Their greatest warriors were nothing compared to the Deathworlders. They had always relied on negotiations and alliances, not force. But the unknown threat had left them with no choice but to call for help. The aliens had heard the rumors, of course, the stories of the Deathworlders' power and ruthlessness. They had long feared what would happen if they ever crossed paths with this deadly species. Yet, despite their fear, they had little choice but to place their trust in these enigmatic saviors. The first reports of the fleet's approach came through just hours after the Deathworlders entered hyperspace. The alien leaders watched nervously as the sensors picked up massive, approaching ships. The size of the fleet was enough to send a ripple of awe and dread through the alien populace. They had hoped for a swift resolution, but nothing could have prepared them for the scale of the force that was coming to their aid. The Deathworlder fleet wasn't just large, it was overwhelming. Thousands of ships, each one capable of turning the tide of any battle, were on their way. The ships glinted in the stars as they passed through the vastness of space, their weapons primed and ready. The sheer scale of the fleet was unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. As the fleet drew closer, Raikor stood in front of his crew, preparing them for the unknown. "We don't know what awaits us," he said, his voice low but firm. "But we will face it head-on. We are Deathworlders. We don't retreat. We don't yield. We fight, and we win." The crew's response was immediate, a chorus of grunts and affirmations. There was no fear in their eyes, only determination. The Deathworlders had been through hell, and they had survived. This would be no different. The fleet's arrival at the edge of the alien system sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The sheer power of their ships made even the most hardened warriors think twice. No one dared to challenge them. The Deathworlders were a force of nature, and they had come to ensure that the galaxy's last hope wouldn't be extinguished. In the command center of the lead ship, Raikor turned to his second-in-command, a warrior named Kira. "Prepare the fleets for entry into the system. We move in fast, no delays." Kira nodded, and the Deathworlder ships began their descent toward the troubled planet. As they broke through the outer layers of the alien system, the sight of the enemy grew clearer. But so did the devastation that had already been caused. The planet was in ruins, its cities smoldering, its fields barren. It was clear the enemy had left its mark. The Deathworlders didn't hesitate. They had come for one reason, and one reason only: to save the galaxy from certain destruction. As the fleet descended toward the planet, the aliens watched in awe and fear. Would the Deathworlders live up to their legendary reputation? Or would the enemies they faced be too much even for them? The answer, though unknown, was about to unfold in a spectacular, violent clash. The galaxy was on the edge, and the Deathworlders were about to show exactly why they were considered the most feared warriors in existence. A show of power. The battle begins. The Deathworlder fleet entered the alien system with a power and precision that left everyone breathless. The ships glided through space like predators on the hunt, their weapons charged and ready. It was a display of military might that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. The aliens, though they had prepared for battle, were left stunned by the scale of the Deathworlder response. On the lead ship, Raker stood calmly, his eyes fixed on the holographic display in front of him. The tactical map showed the enemy's positions scattered across the planet's surface. But it wasn't just the enemy they had to worry about. The planet itself was a battlefield. Ruins and firestorms marked where the conflict had already torn apart everything in its path. "We can't let them destroy the entire planet," Raker muttered, his voice low but deadly serious. He knew the stakes. If the Deathworlders didn't intervene, the galaxy would lose another world to the chaos that had already taken too many. "Prepare the assault teams," Raker ordered. "I want ground forces ready to deploy. We take this planet back, and we do it now." Kira, his second-in-command, nodded sharply. "Understood, Commander." She relayed the orders, and the crew jumped into action. Deathworlder troops, hardened by countless battles, prepared for the landing. The soldiers were trained for every kind of combat, from the harshest environments to the most brutal enemies. This wouldn't be their first war, and it surely wouldn't be their last. The first wave of ships descended into the atmosphere, their engines roaring as they cut through the sky like unstoppable forces of nature. The explosions from the planet's surface could be heard even from the sky, but the Deathworlder fleet paid no mind. They had seen worse. They had fought against worse. The fleet's assault began with devastating force. The skies were filled with death as massive cannons fired powerful blasts that obliterated enemy lines before they could even respond. Each blast shook the planet's surface, sending shockwaves through the ground. It wasn't just a battle, it was an execution. Raker's voice cut through the chaos as he gave the orders for the next phase of the attack. "Deploy the dropships. We're taking the ground." The massive ships carrying the soldiers of the Deathworlder fleet broke away from the main fleet, heading straight toward the surface. Inside the dropships, the soldiers prepared themselves for the landing. Some tightened their grips on weapons, others ran through mental checklists of the mission ahead. But all of them shared one thing in common. They had no doubt that this would be another victory for the Deathworlders. They had been forged in the harshest conditions and had survived battles that would have broken lesser species. As the dropships made their way toward the planet, Raker's ship began its final approach. The planet's surface was now visible in full, scared by the devastating battle that had taken place before their arrival. Enemy ships dotted the sky, their weapons firing relentlessly at the descending fleet. But nothing could stop the Deathworlders. Nothing. In the distance, the enemy's forces began to gather. They had clearly underestimated the Deathworlders, but now they were about to pay the price. The Deathworlder fleet's weapons fired again, and this time, the enemy ships didn't even have a chance. The skies were filled with fire as the Deathworlders cut through them with ease. Explosions lit up the heavens, leaving nothing but wreckage behind. Raker stood in front of the command console, his expression unwavering as he watched the destruction unfold. His thoughts were clear. This battle was just beginning, but the outcome was already decided. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived, and they would take no prisoners. "Keep pushing forward," Raker commanded. "No mercy. This world will be saved." As the dropships finally touched down on the scorched earth below, the Deathworlder soldiers poured out, weapons raised. They were greeted by the sight of the enemy's forces, already gathered and prepared for what they hoped would be a final stand. But the Deathworlders had no intention of allowing that to happen. The ground shook as explosions rang out in every direction. The battle for the planet was now in full swing. The enemy fought fiercely, but they were no match for the Deathworlders' sheer power and brutality. The Deathworlder warriors surged forward, unstoppable in their determination to reclaim the planet. "Push them back," Rakor's voice echoed across the battlefield. "This planet is ours now." And so, the battle raged on. With every passing moment, the Deathworlder fleet's presence grew stronger, their enemies weaker. The galaxy was watching, and one thing was clear. The Deathworlders were not just a force to be reckoned with. They were the galaxy's final hope. The tide turns, Deathworlders on the ground. The deafening sounds of war echoed across the battlefield. Explosions lit up the sky. The rumble of incoming fire sent tremors through the ground. The air was thick with smoke, and the heat from the flames made it nearly impossible to breathe. But none of this fazed the Deathworlder soldiers. They marched forward, weapons raised, eyes focused. To them, this was just another mission, another battle to win. On the ground, Rakor stood tall, his eyes scanning the horizon. The enemy forces were still trying to regroup, but they were beginning to falter. They had underestimated the Deathworlder fleet, believing their numbers and firepower would be enough to stand against them. But now, they were learning the hard way that no force could stand up to the might of Deathworlders. Rakor gripped his weapon tighter. His mind was clear. The strategy was simple: push forward, eliminate any threats, and take control of the planet. He nodded to Kira, who was stationed next to him, and gave a single command: move out. The Deathworlder troops advanced, their footsteps purposeful and synchronized. The enemy soldiers attempted to regroup and form defensive lines, but their efforts were futile. The Deathworlder assault was relentless. Suppressing fire, Kira shouted as she fired her blaster, sending bolts of energy into the advancing enemy ranks. The enemy tried to return fire, but it was clear they were outmatched. The Deathworlder weapons were far more advanced, and the sheer intensity of their firepower left the enemy with no chance to retaliate. Despite the intense battle, Rakor remained calm. His troops were trained for situations like this. They knew how to fight in the most hostile environments, against the most ruthless enemies. It wasn't just about strength. It was about strategy, precision, and dominance. And the Deathworlders embodied all of these traits. Rakor's attention shifted to a group of enemy soldiers trying to flank his position. He raised his hand, signaling his squad to spread out. Within seconds, his team was repositioned, cutting off the enemy's escape routes and cornering them. The Deathworlder soldiers moved like a well-oiled machine, using tactics and teamwork to overwhelm the enemy. They were relentless, merciless, and calculating. There was no room for error, no hesitation. Each movement was deliberate, every action taken with the sole goal of winning. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the galaxy. As Rakor led his troops forward, a sudden explosion shook the ground beneath their feet. A massive blast sent debris flying into the air, but Rakor and his team didn't flinch. They kept moving, undeterred by the chaos around them. "Keep pushing," Rakor shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. "The planet is ours." His soldiers responded without question, pushing forward with an unyielding force. As they advanced, the enemy lines began to crumble. The Deathworlders were too powerful, too well coordinated. The enemy was breaking, their morale shattered under the onslaught. In the midst of the chaos, Rakor spotted the leader of the enemy forces. The general was trying to rally his troops, but it was clear that he was losing control. His soldiers were retreating, panicked, their once strong resistance crumbling. Rakor knew this was the moment to strike. With a swift motion, he signaled his troops to charge. The Deathworlder soldiers surged forward, their weapons raised high, closing the distance between them and the enemy general. In the final moments, the enemy general turned to face Rakor, his eyes filled with disbelief. "How?" he whispered, struggling to comprehend the situation. "How did you defeat us so quickly?" Rakor's eyes were cold as he answered, his voice unwavering. "Because we are Deathworlders. With that, he led the final charge, and the last of the enemy's resistance fell. The planet, once on the brink of destruction, was now firmly in the hands of the Deathworlder fleet. But Raker knew this wasn't over yet. The battle for the planet was won, but the fight for the galaxy was far from over. The Deathworlders had proven themselves as heroes, but they knew that many more battles lay ahead. This was only the beginning. The Deathworlder fleet had shown the galaxy what they were capable of, and the message was clear. There was no place for weakness in this universe. The Deathworlders were here, and they would stop at nothing to protect the innocent and ensure that justice was served. The galaxy would never forget the day the Deathworlder fleet became the ultimate saviors. The aftermath. A galaxy changed forever. The dust from the battlefield settled slowly, hanging in the air like a heavy fog. The faint smell of smoke mixed with the scent of the scorched earth, but there was no time to pause. Raker stood among his troops, looking around at the remnants of the fierce battle. The enemy forces had been completely routed, but the victory felt hollow in his mind. His soldiers were strong, but there was a deep feeling that something had shifted in the galaxy that day, something irreversible. The Deathworlder fleet had landed with the precision of a force that had never known defeat. It wasn't just their strength that had won them the day. It was their unbreakable resolve, their tactical brilliance, and their refusal to accept failure. It had been a flawless victory, but Raker couldn't shake the thought that this was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. He turned to his commanding officer, Kira, who was standing beside him, surveying the battlefield with the same grim expression. She had been by his side for years, and her loyalty was unquestionable. She was as focused as ever, but even she seemed to understand the weight of what had just happened. "What now?" Kira asked, her voice barely audible over the ringing in their ears from the final explosions. Raker's gaze hardened as he scanned the horizon. "Now we prepare," he replied, his voice low but filled with determination. "The enemy is broken, but there are others out there. The galaxy is vast, and we've just shown it what we're capable of. We will keep pushing until the galaxy understands that we will not be stopped." Kira nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. They had made their statement. The Deathworlder fleet had sent a clear message to the entire galaxy. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to dominate, to protect those who could not protect themselves, and to obliterate any who stood in their way. The surviving aliens, those they had come to rescue, began to approach the Deathworlders with cautious steps. Some of them were still in shock, unable to fully process what had just transpired. Others had tears in their eyes, grateful to be alive, grateful to the Deathworlders who had come when all seemed lost. Raker couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride as he watched them. They had fought for more than just victory. They had fought for something larger. They had fought for a galaxy that had forgotten what true strength looked like. The Deathworlders were no longer the feared outsiders. They were the saviors of the oppressed, the protectors of those who had no one else to turn to. As the aliens slowly approached, one brave figure stepped forward, a tall, slender creature with eyes that gleamed with both relief and reverence. The alien was shaking, its voice trembling as it spoke. "Thank you. Thank you for saving us," it said, its voice full of gratitude. Raker's expression softened for just a moment as he nodded. "It's not over yet," he said, though the words were not harsh. They were filled with the quiet conviction that defined him and his people. "We fight to protect those who need us. The galaxy will never forget what we did today, and we will continue to stand against anyone who threatens the peace." The alien nodded, taking a step back to join the others, who were beginning to speak among themselves, sharing in their newfound hope. The Deathworlder fleet's arrival had changed everything. The galaxy would never look at them the same way again. The power of the Deathworlders was undeniable. But Raker knew that peace was fragile. Though the planet had been saved, the work was far from finished. There were still many dangers lurking in the galaxy, enemies who would seek to challenge their dominance. The Deathworlder fleet might have won this battle, But the real war was just beginning. As the sun began to set over the newly liberated world, Rakor stood tall, his gaze set firmly on the horizon. The Deathworlder fleet had proven its worth, but it would take more than just one victory to change the fate of the galaxy. It would take strength, it would take resolve, and most of all, it would take unity. The galaxy was watching, and the Deathworlders would never back down. They would fight, they would conquer, and they would be the ones to reshape the universe according to their own terms. The Deathworlders had arrived as saviors, but now they would forge their legacy as rulers of the galaxy. Preparing for the next move, the calm before the storm. The days following the battle were a blur of activity. The once quiet planet was now a bustling hub of operations. Rakor and his fleet worked tirelessly to fortify their position, ensuring that the victory would not be in vain. It wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about preparing for the inevitable consequences of their actions. The galaxy was vast, and while they had won this battle, many would see their arrival as a threat to the established order. Rakor stood on the command deck of the flagship, watching as the planet's atmosphere rippled with the presence of the Deathworlder fleet. The fleet was still in orbit, but they had begun rebuilding and establishing new alliances with the grateful aliens they had saved. Every ship, every fighter, every unit had its role to play now. No one could afford to rest. Kira entered the room, her face drawn but focused, a symbol of the urgency in the air. Rakor, we've received word from the Council. They want to meet. They want to discuss the future of the galaxy and the role we'll play. Rakor's eyes narrowed. The Council was a collection of the most powerful galactic leaders. Some would likely view the Deathworlders as a necessary force for good, while others would see them as invaders. Either way, the conversation would be difficult. They had made a lot of enemies in a short amount of time, and Rakor knew it would take more than just strength to win them over. They want to know what we intend to do next. Kira continued, walking over to the holographic table where a map of the galaxy was displayed. The galaxy is on edge, and everyone is watching us. They're afraid, Rakor, afraid of what the Deathworlders will do now that they've seen our power. Rakor crossed his arms, staring at the map. Let them be afraid, he said coldly. Fear is a powerful motivator, but they will understand soon enough. We don't destroy without reason. We protect. We fight for those who can't fight for themselves. We've already proven that. Kira gave him a knowing look. And what about those who will fight against us? The ones who want to see us crushed? Rakor's eyes darkened. They will learn that the Deathworlders do not lose. With a deep breath, Rakor turned away from the map. It wasn't about threats or power. It was about survival. They were outnumbered in some ways, and the enemies of the Deathworlders had powerful allies. But Rakor had learned something important during this campaign. Strength alone wasn't enough. It was the ability to inspire loyalty, to forge alliances with those who shared the same goal. The galaxy will change, Rakor said, his voice low and filled with quiet intensity. We will be its new protectors, and we will show the universe that we are not to be underestimated. But we must be strategic. The Council may not accept us willingly, but we can show them that we are the future, that we are the power that can reshape this galaxy. Kira nodded. She understood his resolve. The Deathworlders had already proven they could protect the weak, but now they had to prove they could lead. This galaxy was teetering on the edge of chaos, and the Deathworlder fleet was the only thing standing in the way of an even darker future. The dawn of a new era, the Deathworlders' legacy. The day of the Council meeting had arrived, and Rakor stood at the head of the massive chamber, surrounded by his trusted officers. The room was filled with representatives from various alien species, some that had been saved by the Deathworlders, and others that viewed them with skepticism. It was a meeting of monumental importance, one that would determine the future of not just the Deathworlder fleet, but the entire galaxy. As the leaders of different factions took their seats, Rakor surveyed the room. He could feel the tension in the air, an undercurrent of fear mixed with curiosity. The Deathworlders were not like any race these aliens had ever encountered. Their reputation preceded them, but now, they were on the verge of proving whether they were heroes or conquerors. The first to speak was Ambassador Jen, a tall and regal alien from a distant planet that had once been hostile toward the Deathworlders. His voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition, yet there was an edge to it. "Rekor of the Deathworlders," Jen began, "you and your fleet have shown strength, yes, but strength alone does not build peace. You have intervened in matters that were not your own. I must ask, what is it that you seek from this galaxy?" Rekor's gaze remained steady as he stepped forward to address the room. His voice was calm, but it resonated with authority. "We seek peace, not through oppression, but through protection. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Our fleet was not sent to conquer, it was sent to save. We have seen the suffering across the galaxy, and we will not stand by while innocents perish. We will protect this galaxy from those who would exploit its people." There was a murmur among the council members, some nodding in agreement, while others whispered among themselves, clearly unconvinced. Rekor continued, his tone unwavering. "But we are not foolish enough to think that peace can come without sacrifice. We will stand ready to fight, whenever the galaxy needs us, and if any force threatens the peace we have fought for, we will ensure that it is brought to justice." One of the counselors, an older alien with deep-set eyes and a somber expression, stood up to challenge him. "You speak of justice, Rekor, but what of those who see you as a threat? Those who view your fleet as an army of invaders rather than protectors? How will you respond when you are met with opposition?" Rekor's gaze softened, but there was no hesitation in his voice. "We will listen, we will reason, and we will fight only when necessary. If it comes to war, we will not back down. But our ultimate goal is to ensure that the weak are never again left to suffer while the strong take what they want." The room fell silent. For the first time, the council members seemed to genuinely consider Rekor's words. Perhaps they had underestimated the Deathworlders. Perhaps they had assumed that brute force would be the extent of their reach. But Rekor was more than just a symbol of power. He was a leader, one who understood that true strength came from compassion, loyalty, and unity. The silence was broken by a voice from the back of the room. "You speak of unity," said the representative from the Farstar Empire, a race that had long been wary of the Deathworlders. "But unity is not built on fear, it is built on trust. If we are to accept your presence in this galaxy, we must know that you will not turn on us when it suits you." Rekor's response was firm. "Trust is earned, not given. We will earn your trust by standing with you, by proving that we can be the protectors of this galaxy, not just its conquerors." The tension in the room slowly began to lift. The counselors were beginning to see that the Deathworlders, while powerful, were not here to rule with an iron fist. They had come to rebuild, to ensure that the suffering they had witnessed never happened again. As the meeting continued, discussions turned to the formation of a new galactic order, one in which the Deathworlders would play a central role, not as rulers, but as guardians. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the Deathworlder fleet had forever changed the course of the galaxy.